are struggles in the world. Who cares more to bless your weary shoulder?
Hello, my name is Nicola Sumner, and this is Marion Barling. We're both members of the Women in Focus production team. Later on in the program, we're going to be showing a film called Karen, Women in Sports. But first, we're going to talk a bit with Marion, the filmmaker. Marion, you've been part of Women in Focus for a number of years.
Yep.
How did you initially get started in media?
Well, it became very clear to me as I watched films and TV how very important they were. And the kinds of programs that I saw on the television and in the films, the way that women were portrayed in them, I couldn't relate to at all. It didn't seem to have anything to do with my experience of the world. It was a very sort of narrow, negative point of view from my perspective of what women were, of what their problems were, of what their interests were. So I thought about that a little while, and then I kind of broke it down into two areas, and I make them arbitrary, but they're really not. They do interlock. One side, you've got the ideological side, like how the films are produced and how they're written and how they're directed. And the other side is the technical side. Like that means dealing with the cameras and the audio and the switching and so forth. And because I'm very involved in the women's liberation movement, and I really do want to make some changes, I thought that sort of getting involved with the media was the only way to get it changed. Now, by getting involved, it meant that one had to tackle both sides. You had to tackle the ideological as well as the technical. And the opportunity for me to do this arose, and so I took it, and it was to do with video. And, you know, I progressed from there.
And then you decided you'd like to learn about film?
Yeah, then I decided, you know, as I said, both film and video are very important. And I think they're really important because when you watch something that's visual as well as audio, you really feel it's real. It really shapes reality for you. It really shows you what reality is. Of course, it's not reality. I mean, it's obviously manipulated and maneuvered in very many ways, like the way it's shot, the way it's edited, the script behind it shapes that form. But I thought that this was very important, that we should become part of it. And that's why I thought that both video and film, we should get those skills, we should become part of those teams, and we should become part of that whole production.
Well, you talk about, you know, creating this image, you know, that it is possible for people who make film and video to create an image of women which is not the way women see themselves.
That's right, yeah.
But you know, as a filmmaker, you're still faced with the problem of, you know, a woman that you might be a part of a film or a video and doesn't see herself in the same way that you do. So how would you make sure that you get her point of view across?
I think this is a very real problem, and if we're women and we want to say that we are showing women's experience, we have to get away from a very traditional way of making film. And the traditional way is that you have one side with the crew and the producers, and the other side with what is called the talent. Those are the people that are in front of the cameras and the whatever media you're using. And so what we have tried to do is work in cooperation, both of us, those in front and those behind. And in the film, in particular, what we're talking about right here, I work quite closely with Karen and Nancy. Nancy was the mother, Karen was the daughter. And what I did was discuss with them what I wanted to do. Then we went out and shot footage, and then I did an interview with them. And then after I had previewed the interview material and the wild footage that I had, I decided which pieces I thought were going to be suitable. And then I got Nancy to come along and listen to what it was that I wanted to use. And I sort of said questions like, you know, I mean, is this what you wanted to say? Have you said what you wanted to say, how you wanted to say? Do you think this represents you positively? You know, is it how you see yourself? And when we would come to an agreement with that, we would go on further. And I did the same thing with Karen, only I waited a little bit longer until I had the film more together. Because you see, I did the film, very little of it sound sync. And so I necessarily had to sort of bring her in a little bit later so she could understand what it was that I was doing. And I showed her the whole work print before I made it into a real print. The work print is like the piece of celluloid that you use before it goes to be printed and then publicly distributed. And I think it's very important that we do work this way. I mean, if we don't work this way, there's always this problem of you as the editor, you as the filmmaker can work by yourself. Of course, you don't work by yourself, you work with other technicians. But you have the control. And unless you ask for that input from the people that you're making the film with, there is a very grave danger of you making an image of those people that does not relate to them
and
as they see themselves. And that is very important. I mean, that's one of the things that we as women are trying to work with, is so that we can say, this is a woman's experience, this is how it happens, this is how the world seems to that woman as she sees it.
Well, the film itself is about Karen and about women in sports. And some people have thought that the film suggests that women should participate in competitive athletics with men in such international tournaments as the Olympics, for example. Was this the sort of thing you had in mind when you made the film?
No, I clearly was not trying to advocate that. Several people have mentioned that to me. No, I would be the last person in the world to advocate that women should try and mimic what men have done. You know, what I'm trying to do is have an input into how women are seen and how they're portrayed. And I'm not advocating that they become the same as men in any way. No, I mean, what I see the film, that there's many things going on in the film. One of the main points that I'm trying to get across is that there is oppression of women in the world. You can call it sex discrimination if you wish, some people choose to. And this oppression works to truncate, to squash, to mutilate a woman's potential. And it happens simply because of her sex. And that's what I'm trying to get across in that film quite strongly. I just happened to use sports as the example because that was the opportunity that was given to me. I certainly don't mean to say that it is only sports that this happens in. I think it's very general.
And how did that opportunity come about, you know, to use the topic of women in sport?
Well, like you know, most of our productions have been in video. And as I said earlier, I think film is very, very important. And I had very, very few skills in filmmaking. I knew a little bit about still photography, but that's a very limited area again. And I wanted to learn those skills. So my situation was such that I was a student at UBC, and UBC has a theatre department, and they give film courses, film production courses. So I enrolled in a film production course. And part of this course meant that I had to take a film, go out and shoot a film and edit it. Now, I could have gone out and shot trees or dogs or beautiful scenic.
Made an experimental film, as it were. I made an
experimental film. But I'm not into experimental filmmaking. What I wanted to do, of course, this meant that I had to outlay some money to actually do this footage and do this coverage. And when I outlay money, I like to think it's going into something I approve of. And I don't approve of all those things. So what I tried to do was look for a topic that I could make a fairly quick film of, which was a mistake to start with. But I wanted it to be something that I could do a political analysis of concerning women's situation in the world. And at that time, it came to my knowledge that there was going to be a conference called Women in Motion. And I decided to try and cover this conference. And so what I did, I went along and took some audio and I took some wild footage. Well, when I had that footage and that material back, you know, in the editing room, I really wasn't satisfied with it. I couldn't really feel that I could make something worthwhile out of it. And it's an awful lot of time and work and energy as well as money. So at that time I happened to know Nancy, who was a friend of mine, and we were talking about Karen, and she was talking about this very real experience that Karen was going through. Karen's a soccer player, and the very real discrimination that she was having to undergo, even with the support of her family. Things were very, very difficult for her. So I thought, well, here is a very real experience, and the people were concerned, were prepared to work with me, and so we decided to shoot some footage of Karen on the soccer field and to do an interview with Karen and Nancy. And when I got that material, that was quite exciting because it was what I wanted. It really did talk about their experience, like in a very primary, first-hand way. And then I thought that it would be a good idea to use the footage that I already had as role models for women in sports, showing them in active, aggressive sports. And so I was able to get the two films that I had, the two sets of footages that I had, and combine them together and make this film. So it was rather haphazard.
Right. Well, you mentioned that there were a number of problems that you had making the film, you know, with money and, you know, starting out in one direction and sort of changing midstream. Was that the majority of problems that you came across?
Well, there was a major problem for money for me, because I discovered shortly after I got into the film just what costs are involved, and they really are quite prohibitive. There's no doubt
Unlike
about
video.
that. Yeah, video is far more accessible. It's easier to work with. You know, there is much more technical knowledge in film. And I mean, this technical knowledge was what I wanted to get at, because traditionally we have been withheld from technical knowledge, and it has been mystified. You know, this whole mystification of what goes on behind the camera. And I very much wanted to get in there and discover what that was all about. So that was a problem for me, you know, the time, the money, trying to work in cooperation with the women in front of the camera as well as behind.
And also the type of film that it is, in fact, it's the most difficult film to make, type of film to make.
Yeah, documentary, which is what this film essentially is, I think is one of the most difficult to get. You know, the equipment's heavy, and you have to take the shots when you can. You have to be, you know, right there at the time. And what you really need is like miles and miles and miles of footage that you can select the pieces that you want.
And also,
well, I neither had much footage, nor much time, nor much money.
And also sound sync.
Yes.
It's sort of a commonplace in documentary.
Documentaries, right. And I was not able to do very much. There's very little sound sync on the film, simply because I didn't have a crew to work with. I didn't have the money to set that up. I mean, that's a more expensive way of shooting film. The way I did it was the least expensive.
Well, there's one last question I'd like to ask. Going to the movies has always been a form of entertainment.
Yeah.
And part of the entertainment is that you have to have a happy ending. Karen has quite a strong ending, but I don't think you'd call it happy. How did that come about?
Yeah. Well, I'm really happy that it's not a happy ending, because I think that, you know, as women, we have got to get away from that traditional kind of form of film. I mean, to have input as to how we see ourselves. Like, we don't have happy endings traditionally. You know, I mean, not traditionally. We have on film, we've had happy endings. But like, our lives really don't have happy endings. And I found it very important that the film, you know, the end of the film is a very important part. It's the most powerful. It's what people go away with. And least of all did I want people to go away thinking that Karen was a fighter, and though Karen indeed is a fighter, you know, I mean, fighting not physical, but, you know, a very sturdy, sort of determined young lady, that is not enough. I didn't want anybody to go away from the film thinking, you know, that, oh, she had got what she wanted, and that, yes, you know, there was a little sex discrimination to start with, but, you know, things are changing, and it's pretty well all over. You know, all we've got to do back is sort of sit back and relax now, and everything's going to take its course. I don't feel like that at all. I think that we have just started to make a few steps into the oppression of women, and we have got to do lots more work.
And sport is only a part of it.
Sport is most certainly only a part of it, and I mean, as I explained, that was the reason why I chose sports. I mean, there are so many topics that one can go into that the list is endless. Yes, I mean, it certainly is, you know, there's this whole feeling through this society of a stereotypical image of female and what that means. And I just don't want to see women truncated and squashed because of that stereotypical image.
Right. Well, we're getting to the end of our time, so I think we should watch the film now.
Those girls in the Olympics that do the shot, they had to learn when they were your age. They didn't just grow into 15 and start doing it. Do you know what the shot put is?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's when you throw
Throw it. Oh, what's so funny about that? I mean, all you do in baseball is throw the ball.
I know, but it doesn't weigh 200.
It looks like it when you're pitching sometimes, doesn't it? I bet it feels like it, doesn't it?
No.
And I'd like to start with a little blurb that Judith Bardwick had on the dust jacket of her book, The Psychology of Women, and I quote, "What are big boys made of? Independence, aggression, competitiveness, leadership, assertiveness, task orientation, outward orientation. And what are big girls made of? Dependence, passivity, fragility, low pain tolerance, non-aggression, non-competitiveness, inner orientation, interpersonal orientation, empathy, sensitivity, nurturance." End of quote. And if I were to ask you what the psychological demands of sport were, they're very compatible with what we expect the male to emulate. And they're farthest removed from what we expect the feminine, the stereotype female to emulate. And therein lies the rub. And I might add that a more recent sort of looking at this problem was done by Boberman, who asked any number of individuals how they would describe a healthy male. And those very same adjectives were used. And then they were asked how you would describe a healthy female. And the same adjectives that Judith Bardwick used were used to describe a healthy female, a mentally healthy one. And then they were asked how you would describe a mentally unhealthy male. And interestingly enough, the very adjectives that described a healthy female are the ones that describe an mentally unhealthy male. I think we got problems.
Well, at first, they said that girls were no good at soccer and everything like that, but I just played anyway, so. And after they didn't say that anymore.
Because why?
I don't know.
Because you were good?
I don't know.
Seriously, I think it's obvious to all of us that there are anatomical and physiological differences. Height, weight, shoulder width, chest girth in most cases, pelvis being broader, more shallow in the female than the male, the construction of the knee, wider knee joint, differences in angle of the femur and the pelvis, created mainly by a wide pelvis. All these differences create different sorts of performance levels with males and females. Some of them, of course, result in less leverage for the female, less power than the male can generate. However, more stability because of the lower centre of gravity and more muscle dexterity.
I just said, like they said that I couldn't play because I was a girl, because girls weren't any good, but I still stayed up there playing anyway. So they just let me play.
Now, just let's look in detail at some of these differences. Females have approximately 6% less muscle mass than a male. Contrary to old wives' tales, of course, it's very difficult for the normal female, or actually impossible, for the normal female to build up muscle to the extent to which the male does because of the influence of the female hormones and the catabolic action of these on muscle tissue. But certainly, one finds females who are quite strong certainly don't look out of place in any society by any male chauvinists. When we look at such athletes as gymnasts and many other female athletes, it seems to be an old wives' tale that the female builds herself into something resembling a male. Females are much more flexible. This aids greatly in so many performances where flexibility is absolutely essential. And I ask you, how would males go when one compares flexibility of the female and the males, if we had to get dressed with zippers and hooks and buttons and so forth behind our back?
I didn't really know what I was going to do. But then my mom started me up in soccer, med team.
What did you do then?
Well, we were by accident driving by the Jericho Park one day, or the Queen Mary Park, and we saw a table out there signing up for soccer. And I guess just on a chance, I thought, why shouldn't she play? She likes it at school. So I went and said, could a little girl play? And they said, yes, this year for the first time, little girls could play in the house leagues. So we signed her up.
How old was Karen then?
You were 8, were you?
Or 9.
No, you were 8 the first year.
No, I was 8 for the first part of it,
That's
but 9.
right. She has a December birthday. Turned 9 in the December.
Females have more fatty tissue, about 7%, about 7 pounds more, around 14%. Around 25%, whereas males are around about 14. This gives them several advantages, especially in aquatics, for example, where they have about 10% more buoyancy or floatability. And as a result, they can also tolerate cold much better than the male, and in fact can even tolerate heat, internal and core temperature better. Other physical capacities, they're fairly equal.
Well, it was the teacher, really, Miss Smith. Just thought that there was no difference, really, I think, between girls and boys. I always had that feeling that that's what she thought. And she encouraged them first, and the girls in that grade played. And then when I heard this, I was delighted, because when I was a kid, I loved soccer. My brother and I used to play it hours, you know, and I would have loved to have played on a team.
But you couldn't, Linda.
I couldn't, because girls just never did. You know, they just didn't when I was a kid. So when Karen said she liked it, and when we saw this table out there with signing up for soccer, it was just a foregone conclusion. I was going to run up with $8 and pay the fee. And that was it, yeah. And now, last year I used to go out and cheer like mad for her. Then I realized I was embarrassing her, so now I don't go. Isn't that right, Karen?
Is that right? Is she embarrassing, Karen? No.
I do.
I don't.
Well, sometimes I do, don't I?
No.
Never? I mean, I can go for the final game next week and cheer for you? Yeah. Oh, good. I will. I thought I was embarrassing her.
And so our notion of what is appropriate masculine behavior and what's appropriate feminine behavior has been culturally pretty well defined, and it's probably been one of the most resistant to change, and this has been especially with regard to sport, that we still are hung up in a lot of old wives' tales, a lot of misconception, a lot of bias, and not just a little bit of male chauvinism that's all thrown in there as a deterrent. And traditionally, because of that compatibility of what the male is supposed to emulate and what the behavioral demands of sport are and the physical demands of sport has become the prerogative of the male. And society applauds the social and the psychological benefits that he gains from sport. On the other side of the picture, most feel that competitive athletics and vigorous sports bring out the undesirable qualities in the female. It's kind of a detriment to her social development.
Oh, that's tough, because all the pressures will be on her to become a young lady or whatever, young woman or whatever. So it's going to be tough.
Do you think this is the age when
Yes, I think this is
the
the age.
pressures are the worst?
Yes, I do. I really do. She's growing up quite fast, actually. So I don't know, but I think all the pressures will be there for her to conform.
Why do you think they put you on the younger league then?
Because you were a girl. They thought she was a boy because she looked like a boy, you see. She
We were
was,
trying to find another 10 group.
yeah.
And then I said, when they asked my name, I said, Karen, and he goes, oh, you're a girl? And I go, yeah, and he goes, then you go over there.
He pointed to the 7-year-old. Until that moment, based on her skills, he was going to put her with the 9 and 10s. He thought she was Kevin, not Karen, you see. So he was going to put her with the 9 and 10s.
Maybe you should change your name.
That's not quite fair, is it?
You told me to.
I said you should be Kevin instead of Karen. But it isn't right, is it? No, it's not right at all. I told her, I knew they were going to do something like this. And I said, well, next, when they ask you your name, say it's Kevin. And then you will look like a boy and your name will be Kevin. But this year, I don't think she's going to get away with it. So she looks like a Karen.
Let me summarise. Anatomical differences appear to favour the male. He's heavier, more rugged, has longer levers, which enables him to generate more power, heavier musculature. The female has the advantage in balance, stability, flexibility. I believe that she shouldn't compete with the male, except in the games where power, strength, equaled out. For example, mixed doubles in tennis and the non-contact games where she can perform almost equally fine.
How old is Karen now?
She's 10 now. She turned 10 at Christmas in December. Yeah, she was 9 like when the year started and turned 10. Automatically, she should have gone up to the next league because she was good enough in her skills and obviously big enough. But they weren't taking girls in the next league, and so she had to stay back and finish out that final year in the house league. The good 9-year-olds would go to Pee Wee. The good 10-year-olds would probably be in what's called Division 7.
All the 10-year-olds.
All the 10-year-olds, eh?
So why aren't you in there, Karen? For a girl.
We asked initially at registration day, could we sign her up for Division 7? They said no.
How do you feel about that, Karen? Well, I really think it's very fair because girls are just as good as boys if they really want to be.
I don't think there's any essential difference between men and women for sports, no.
What about in terms of strength? One often hears that women have
If it's the strength,
an extra level of fat, or that they're built one way because they have babies or they menstruate. How do you feel about that? Do you think that makes too much difference?
there are a few vulnerable points in men, too, physically, that obviously can detract from their performance, and does. I've seen men laid out flat in the field because they've had a kick in the wrong place. Those kind of things don't make any difference to me. I don't think that that's what's at issue. I think what's at issue is that men have the corner on the sports. And that's the way it is. They've defined it, and they're going to continue to define it until such time as women can make it clear that this is just a discrimination.
How do the pressures vary then for women and then for men?
Well, there's all sorts of ways they vary. For one thing, our culture tolerates a male being adolescent for life. He can be an adolescent at 80. A girl's tolerated about 6 months worth of tantrums when she begins her period, and then she's expected to grow up and become the nurturer of men, you know. I mean, I know lots of men who at 40 are as adolescent as my son was at 15, and we tolerate this, but we don't for women. They've got to mature into women or whatever, into mothers, sisters, aunts, teachers, nurses, you know. Doctors, says Karen. Yeah, doctors. And lawyers too, we hope, eh?
Do you think there's a place for somebody that grows into maturity and still remains very, as it were, aggressive, active, physically
I
strong?
hope so. I just hope so, because both my girls are going to be quite physically strong, and they are already quite active, you know. I hope so. But there hasn't been much place in the past, because I was all those things, and I'm not now, you know. So I hope so.
Who knows more about your story struggles in the world. Who cares more to bless your weary shoulders than the woman in your life? The world. Who cares more to bless your weary shoulders than the woman in your life as she's trying to come through? A woman's